Hello everyone, welcome to my TechEd session regarding the topic Extensibility with ABAP Cloud for SAP S/4HANA Cloud Private Edition. My name is Alexander Rother and I'm absolutely happy to introduce this topic to you. So let's get started. At the beginning I want to explain the agenda so that you know what you can expect from this session. So at the beginning I will explain to you the cloud extensibility model as we use it in S/4 Cloud. The second topic is the brand new ABAP Cloud development model. And third, I will tell you how you can use ABAP Cloud in your S/4 Cloud Private Edition. So let's get started, the cloud extensibility model. At the beginning, I think it makes sense to take one step back and understand how classic ABAP extensibility worked. So here on the left-hand side, we have one classic Business Suite system. We have the NetWeaver at the bottom, and the Business Suite applications are sitting on top. And your extensions are represented by these two boxes here. So you can see directly that you can use any SAP object that you find in your system. And your extensions can even reside inside the SAP applications. Okay? And this is basically the key principle of classic extensibility. You can use and modify any object you find in your SAP system. So just two examples. Here on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a direct select on the SAP database table, on Mara here in this case. Totally fine with that. And the other example is the implementation of a user exit. This is basically a modification, also no problem with classic extensibility. So the advantage of that extensibility model is that you have no restrictions at all for your extensions. And for that reason, you're extremely flexible and powerful doing so. So what is the disadvantage? Well, that's very clear. You lose the interface between the SAP software and your own code. And that means if you change the SAP software in an upgrade, this leads to very high test effort, and sometimes your extensions are so interwoven with the SAP code that you need to adapt them. So that means there's a very, very high upgrade effort, and for that reason, of course, your agility and your speed of innovation will decrease. So several years back, we introduced S/4 Public Cloud, and there it was clear that this cannot work anymore. So in the public cloud, all the software upgrades run in an automated fashion for all the tenants in parallel. So that means there is no customer-specific upgrade project anymore where you can take care about any specific extensions and so on, but everything is automated for everyone. So that means for the public cloud, we invented a new rule for ABAP extensibility, and that is your extensions must be clearly separated from the SAP software. That translates into two things. First, of course, no modifications are allowed anymore. And second, you must only use stable public APIs to talk to SAP applications and stable public extension points. In the public cloud, we as SAP can make sure that you follow these rules. We will see in the last section of this talk that this is also what we recommend for the private cloud, and we will tell you how you can manage the coexistence of this classic extensibility that you know already and the new extensibility. All right, so now having that in mind, let's have a look what kind of options do we actually have for extensibility then. So here on the left-hand side, we have one S/4 Cloud system, and everything sitting here would be on stack. On stack means everything sitting here is running in the same system, on the same hardware, same HANA database, and so on. And on the right-hand side, anything developed here would be side by side. That means it's decoupled. It's on a separate system, separate hardware, and so on. So the first pattern that we can use in the cloud extensibility model is the side-by-side extensibility. Here on the right-hand side, you can see that we have a new application, a new extension that is developed on BTP. You do that if it's loosely coupled. And if you then want to talk to the SAP S4 applications, you do that by calling remote APIs. For example, OData services, SOAP services, and so on. And you can also consume events, of course. The important thing is that these APIs are exactly designed for that purpose, and they are released. They are public released APIs for that. The second pattern that we have is a new application, a new extension on the stack. You do that if it's tightly coupled. For example, if your extension needs to run in the same logical unit of work as the SAP application, then you do that. And if you then want to talk to S4 applications, you do that by calling local APIs, or you can also perform a join of your custom data with SAP data and so on, things like that. Important is, also these APIs are public. They are released and designed for that purpose. The third pattern is the extension of an existing app. Of course, this is tightly coupled because it's inside the SAP application. And what you can do there is typically extending SAP code by implementing a body, for example. You can extend data structures, user interfaces, and so on. Also here, this is only possible for public extension points. So here you directly see one very important principle of the cloud extensibility model. You can only talk to public extension points. All right, so now we have the patterns. What kind of personas can use these patterns? So here in the first line, we have the key user or a business expert. This is also called a citizen developer using low-code, no-code tools. And in the second line, we have the developer. The developer has real coding skills. He works with an IDE, and he's really the expert. So on the stack in the S4 Cloud system, a key user would use the typical S4 Cloud key user tools. And the developer would use the S4 Cloud ABAP environment. On BTP, for side-by-side extensions, a key user or citizen developer uses the SAP Build portfolio, so like build apps, process automation, and the like. And the developer has the full flexibility and power of BTP with Java, Node.js, and CAP, or also in the ABAP environment. So now very important is, if you do ABAP-based extensions, so that means on stack or side-by-side in the ABAP environment, then only upgrade stable and cloud-ready custom code is allowed. How do you do that? You use ABAP Cloud. So not the classic ABAP development anymore, ABAP Cloud is the way to go. So what is ABAP Cloud? The second topic. ABAP Cloud is our ABAP development model to develop cloud-ready business applications, services, and extensions. We have it on BTP, we have it in S4, we have it on-premise, in the private cloud, and in the public cloud. So this is now really a huge milestone, because now we have one common ABAP development model in any S4 edition and also in BTP. You can see here that in the public cloud and on BTP, this is the only thing you can do. You must use ABAP Cloud. And here in on-premise and in the private edition, there you see that the classic ABAP development model is still around. And many of you will even have tons of legacy classic custom ABAP code. And of course, the question immediately rises, how shall you manage the coexistence of those two development models? How can you distinguish between those two? And this is what I'm going to show you later. So, how does it feel like developing ABAP Cloud? So here on the left-hand side, once again, we have an S4 Cloud system. About the public interfaces here, we talked frequently already. Your extensions are sitting here. No modifications inside anymore, only here, right? And also for ABAP extensions on BTP, we have the public interfaces, and your extensions are sitting here. So now I would like to spend a few more words regarding the remote APIs. Okay, of course, your side-by-side extensions, they talk to the S4 applications using remote APIs. And these remote APIs, they can either be the APIs developed by SAP, but now imagine you have a very complex side-by-side extension. And then it might be that the general API provided by SAP does not fulfill all the requirements. So what can you do? With ABAP Cloud, you can also develop your custom remote API in the system, in the S4 system, and use that to drive your side-by-side extension. So this is one very important use case for the on-stack developer extensibility. All right, what else do we have in ABAP Cloud? APIs we talked already about. So cloud-optimized ABAP programming language. Maybe you have heard the developer keynote yesterday, and then you know that ABAP turned 40 this year. So we have a huge experience and a huge history in ABAP code already. So now for ABAP Cloud, of course, we modernized that. Old legacy statements that are not required anymore, they are also not possible in ABAP Cloud. For example, accessing the operating system. That doesn't make sense in the cloud, right? So this is not possible. We really have a cloud-optimized ABAP language. Then the IDE is ABAP Development Tools. We do not have SE80, SE38 anymore. It's ABAP Development Tools. And the programming model is ABAP RESTful Application Programming Model. No DIN-Pro, but RAP. Okay, so let's see how that looks like in a system if you are then really logging on to an S4 system and developing ABAP Cloud. This is a screenshot of a class that is developed in ABAP Cloud. And I would like to draw your attention towards line 25 and 26. Here we have two syntax errors. In line 25, we have a call function to the function module pop-up to confirm. Probably you know that function module. It just triggers a sub GUI pop-up. There you can click yes and no and then react on the input. Okay? So this is not possible here anymore. It results in a syntax error. Why? Well, DIN-Pro is just not part of ABAP Cloud, so you cannot use it here. Likewise, in line 26, we have a select from the database table Mara. Also, that is not possible anymore because the database table is not released for the usage in ABAP Cloud. So with these two syntax errors in ABAP Cloud, you would never be able to activate that class. And for that reason, it would also never run in your system. Okay, so this is how we really make sure that in ABAP Cloud, you really follow the right rules. On the other hand, of course, line 28, line 29, there we have a select on the CDS UI product. This is totally fine because the CDS UI product is released exactly for that purpose. So this is possible. Okay, so now we have an idea what developing ABAP Cloud means. How can we now use that in your private cloud system? At the beginning, I would like to make some expectation management. So in the public cloud, all the upgrades were automated. So now in the private cloud, this is not the case. You still have your own individual upgrade projects. Okay, so there's no magic involved here. But however, what do we want to reach? Our goal is that in the private cloud, your upgrades become much more easy than before, so that you can do them more frequent. And at the same time, of course, we also want to safeguard your extensions, so that after the upgrade, they continue to run smoothly. Okay? How do we do that? Well, we just follow the public cloud extensibility rules as far as possible, because we know that there this is guaranteed. Just to remind you, what was the rule? The rule is your extensions must be clearly separated from the SAP software. No modifications, only stable APIs. And once again, I told you, in the public cloud, we guarantee that this is fulfilled. You can only do that. And now in the private cloud, you have the full flexibility. So we need to tell you, how can you turn on ABAP Cloud? Because you have classic ABAP and ABAP Cloud at the same time in your system. So how does that work? You can turn on ABAP Cloud, the strict ABAP Cloud syntax rules that I showed before. You can turn them on for each and every development object. How? Well, we have an attribute for each development object that we call the ABAP language version. And by setting this ABAP language version to ABAP for cloud development, automatically for this object, the ABAP Cloud rules will hold. If you set it to standard ABAP, the classic ABAP rules will hold. Okay? So by this attribute, setting this attribute for each object, you can say ABAP Cloud Classic. Okay? We also understood now that in an object that is developed with ABAP Cloud, you can only use released APIs. And that's the second question. Well, how can I know which API is released? Which API can I use? Well, also there, we have an attribute at each and every object that we call API state. And if that API state is set to a system internal use, that means a local API that you can directly call in ABAP, if it's released with use in cloud development, then you can use this object, in this example iProduct, in a class or any development object that is developed using ABAP for cloud development. Okay? So these are basically the two attributes. One attribute to steer ABAP Cloud classic ABAP, sorry. And the other attribute to steer usable in ABAP Cloud or not usable. So, of course, now you probably have in mind that if you have these attributes and each developer can set them as he wants, then you have a vast mixture in your system. And of course, that doesn't make sense. You want to have control. You want to know what is happening in your system. And so how shall you manage this? And this is what we call the three-tier extensibility model for S/4HANA Cloud, Private Edition, and on-premise. So here on the left-hand side, we have the S4 system. In the middle, we have BTP. On the right-hand side, some explanations. So here, the first tier is the pure cloud extensibility model. So in tier 1, you do exactly the same as you would do in the public cloud. Strict ABAP Cloud, key user extensibility, and on BTP, you have the full flexibility. Okay? Of course, this should be the default for anything you newly develop because you directly follow the cloud rules. Then we know that if we develop in ABAP Cloud, we need released APIs by SAP. What do you do if such an API is missing? There, tier 2 comes into the game. This is what we call the Cloud API enablement layer. And in tier 2, what you do is you develop a wrapper around a non-released SAP object and then release this wrapper for ABAP Cloud. And by that, it becomes accessible in tier 1. And you can do that on your own because we have the attributes I showed you before for each and every development object, and you can set them. Okay? So this means that a missing API in tier 1 doesn't stop you from doing tier 1 development. You can enable your own API. Of course, that should be accompanied by a customer influence request that you post to SAP so that we can also develop some APIs, request-driven. But that doesn't stop you. And then, of course, tier 3, that's the classic ABAP development, and all your existing legacy code will end up here. If you move towards S4, of course, you should retire as much as possible of that. Or if there is a business case, you can also renovate and innovate towards tier 1, of course, towards the cloud extensibility model. But what you can at least do is to adapt tier 3. That means make it more upgrade stable, move away from modifications, maybe use more bodies, and so on. Okay, so now we have understood the role of the 3 tiers. What is the benefit of that? The benefit is if you follow tier 1, then you automatically fulfill all the clean core principles. We have very clear technical guidance for tier 1. What is possible there? What is not possible there? How do you set this up in your system that you can guarantee that in tier 1 really only ABAP Cloud is being done, and so on. So this is very, very powerful here. Of course, if you develop here in tier 1, your extensions are upgrade stable because this is cloud readiness. At the same time, if an API is missing, this doesn't stop you because we have tier 2, and that helps you to still explore the very rich scope that you have in your private cloud or on-premise system. So what is also absolutely important, in tier 2, you access non-released SAP APIs. Technically, this is a violation of ABAP Cloud rules. We know that. So you want to control what is happening in tier 2, and this you can do with the ABAP Test Cockpit. We have ABAP Test Cockpit checks in place that provide you with the information which APIs are used there and which APIs are enabled. So you have full control what is being done in tier 2, and you can place a strong governance on that. And this is really important to manage everything here. So then I also told you that with the attributes for each and every development object, you can take, for example, out of tier 3 here, you can take one class and change the attribute of the language version. You receive syntax errors, you can refactor them, and then move it towards tier 1. Okay, so that would be the technical flow. That means with this 3-tier model, we enable a stepwise cloud transformation because you can do that for each and every object. So if you're in a greenfield scenario, then of course tier 3 is empty and you should only use tier 1 and tier 2. If you're in a brownfield scenario, then of course all your legacy ends up here in tier 3 and everything you newly develop should be in tier 1 and tier 2. All right, I think that was pretty dense at the end. So now let's come to a quick summary. At the beginning, I explained to you that we have a very comprehensive extensibility portfolio in S4 Cloud. Then I explained to you that for any ABAP-based extension, you should use ABAP Cloud. This is the way to go. And then finally, in the private cloud and in on-premise, you have the coexistence of the two development models, the classic ABAP development model and ABAP Cloud. And to manage that, use the three-tier extensibility model. If you want to learn more about that, please follow here this link to the brand new learning guide here. And if you are more interested in some papers, in some documents, official guidelines, if you want to read those, please follow this link here to the blog post of our Chief Product Owner, Boris Gebhardt, because here he links all the relevant information. And so you can follow that and find all the official guidelines. Of course, also take a look here at the general digital transformation with Cloud ERP portfolio. You get a discount, you can expand your network, and so on. Please have a look there. And with that, first, thank you very much for listening, and I think we can turn over to Q&A.
Live Q&A.
All right, so welcome back. We have a very quick Q&A. So we have one question. What is ABAP for key users in the ADT? Probably you have taken care that, for this screenshot that I showed you there, and you're exactly right. The ABAP for key users in ADT, that will vanish in the future. That is just the language version that we have for key user objects. All right, then we have one question from Jack. Are there transaction codes still allowed and permitted in ABAP Cloud? So we have the sub-GUI transactions that you classically have, and these are not part of ABAP Cloud. In ABAP Cloud, we are talking about Fiori applications for any transactional application. Okay. Then let me pick another question. So we have many questions here. So first of all, thank you very much for these many questions. Some take some time for reading, so I also need some time. And somehow on the screen, they are also moving around. So that's a pretty hard. All right. So how can I, Martin is asking, how can I transform my old tons of legacy code to ABAP Cloud code? Are there any migration tools? Of course, this is a very important question. As I told you, there is no real business case to just transform everything you have in the system. And to be honest, this is also unrealistic. You should do that on a business by business case driven decision and check which extensions do you need future ready and in ABAP Cloud. And for the rest, you can perform some changes so that you adapt them, make them a bit more upgrade stable, check your modifications, for example, or check which extensions led to problems in the last upgrade. And then you can refactor those. But it doesn't make sense to take all the 100,000 objects that you have in the system and refactor anything. Of course, regarding tooling, we have the intelligent custom code management. That is very important to start with analyzing your own code. And then, of course, we also have the ATC in place that provides information what kind of violations to ABAP Cloud rules do you actually have. For some things, we have quick fixes in place that you can use to change the code and so on. But really do that case by case. OK, we have one short question from Coelho and a short response due to the time. So how should I separate Tier 2 from Tier 1? Please have a look at the guidelines that we have there. It's officially documented. Tier 1 is in an own software component, and that's the important separation of Tier 1. Okay? The details are in the guidelines. All right, with that, I would like to thank you very much for joining. Have great fun at TechEd, and see you next time. Goodbye.